Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Tired of stories about other people's success? We can help you change your life, determine your time freedom point, and join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Hey, hello, and welcome back to the Ideal Investor Show, where we like to talk about topics that are relevant for us as real estate investors. And oftentimes I'm trying to really focus on the residential real estate investing that we're promoting and providing you with curated properties and stuff like that. But there's also other stuff that obviously influences the economy, mortgage rates, and all that good stuff. And so last week, it was one of those rare situations where two important data points that the government is basically tracking and we should all be aware of came out. And the stock market and a lot of other financial services organizations were very keen to hear and find out what those data points were. And they were, as far as the language that is being used, if you're not necessarily following this stuff all the time, they were the CPI and the PPI. And I don't know why we ended up having these kind of abbreviations for everything. But the CPI is basically the Consumer Price Index, which is a basket of goods that the government has put together to find out how are prices doing. So it has things like rent in different places in the world. It has things like how much your food costs, how much the gas costs, and all those kind of things. So what was the number? The number that they came up with for the month of June was 2.6%. No, it was actually 3%. So 3% is the inflation rate right now. And you know that the Federal Reserve would like to see it to be 2%. So it's still 50% higher than they would like it to see. But on the other hand, it is a little bit lower than it was in May. I think in May it was like 3.3%. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out when talking about these numbers is that I have the distinct impression that two things are happening. One I'm absolutely sure about. The other one is more like a speculation on my part. The one that I'm absolutely sure about is that the basket of things that are being actually used and the formulas, the mathematical formulas that are being applied to come up with the inflation rate have been changed many times in the last few decades. For me, when you say, I want to find out how much more something costs, like a gallon of milk in the last 50 years, I don't see any reason why there would be any difference on how to measure the price for a gallon of milk 50 years, 40 years, 10 years, 2 years, and today. But for some reason, the government found a cause to make changes to the way they calculate. And they actually do it not necessarily by saying, okay, milk is in or milk is out, but what they're doing is they say, how important is certain stuff? Now, I give you a quick example of what that means. If you say milk and butter and fruit and vegetable and orange juice and all those kind of things that you buy in the grocery store are important, and then you compare them, for example, to goods like a refrigerator and a laptop and an oven and a washing machine. So the government can say, okay, the food stuff has an importance of 20% more than average, and all that kind of other stuff I mentioned has 20% less than average. So that means the increase or decrease in prices for all the food stuff is more important than the other way around. Now, you can immediately see where the manipulation starts. If food and those kind of things go up too fast, the government can change the formula and say, you know what, people need to buy a new phone and a new laptop every other year, so we make that average importance and no longer minus 20%. And suddenly, the whole calculation changes, and the number that comes out at the end, whether it's 3%, 4%, or 7%, as it was in the past in 2021, that's how they can actually manipulate what the end result is. How do you know? I always encourage people to say, take a certain thing or a certain basket of things that you regularly buy. And I know, at least for my life, we have had favorite stores wherever we lived, and we bought favorite things at favorite stores. And so you went there once a week or so, or with Costco maybe every other week, and then you bought certain things there, right? And if you say, okay, well, let me just look, either if you have the receipts, you can compare the receipts, or going forward, you can say, okay, so I just look at how much does my little basket of stuff that I typically buy costs me right now, and let's say it costs you $120. And then just keep an eye on how it's developing. Now, if you have your old receipts, you can probably find, and most people, many people have posted this on YouTube videos and TikTok videos and other places, that they kept the receipts and they looked at the last year, a few years since 2020. So basically like 3.5 years now. And they found that those receipts show that the prices for the stuff that they buy in a regular supermarket have gone up 40 to 50%. And if you take the official number, I took the official labor statistic and Treasury Department statistics about inflation that they reported, just like I mentioned the CPI number, it comes out to be 20 to 28%, depending on which number you're actually looking at. So basically, people are saying when I go shopping, I find that the stuff is twice as much more expensive than what the government says. And what that actually means is that you have to be very careful to believe these numbers, especially when you look in the context of the Federal Reserve, which influences interest rates, which influences the mortgage interest rate that we buy for our investment properties. Well, if they take these numbers that are basically manipulated, if you ask me, then their actions will be wrong. The other number I mentioned, PPI, is the Producer Price Index, and that's something that is a little bit forward-looking because obviously when the prices for those that produce goods go up, and then those produced goods actually make it to the places of sale, let's say to the supermarket or to the hardware store or so forth, then they add their margin on top of it, and that PPI or Producer Price Index went up for June by 2.6%. So my guess, if that will bring inflation above 3% or remain about 3% or something in that area. The point is what I want to also get across, not just giving you the news about these numbers and my opinion, but also to not fall victim to a relatively small nominal number. And what I mean by that is whether it's 3.1 or 3.5 or something like that percent sounds relatively small. But what we have to keep in mind, that is always on top of all the increases that we already had in the past. So if those people who keep their receipts are right, and they have found 40 to 50% increases in the prices of the stuff that we consume on a regular basis for food and vegetable and fruit and gas and those kind of consumer goods. And they say now the latest statistic is that it went up another 3%. If it was 40% in the last 3 years, now we're at 43%. Right? So that's important to realize. And in my opinion, it is important to keep an eye on when there will be actually any changes. I am personally not particularly optimistic. My expectation is that we might see one change in interest rates by the Federal Reserve before the year is out, specifically because there are elections coming in November. And that one change will be probably something like a quarter point. And what you will see is that the stock market and all kinds of stuff is going to go completely haywire because everybody thinks the world has changed. I can predict that for sure already. But a 0.25% change in interest rates is really not going to make any difference for us. So we will need to be patient. And as you have been listening to me, hopefully for a long time, this has been going on. We've been publishing this for 2 years or more than 2 years now. We just had episode 300, so you can imagine how many weeks and months we have been doing this show. And through all this time, I've always said, I believe it takes 3 to 4 years now. That's another year ago. So I think we will probably need to wait another 2 years at least until interest rates are at a point where it would be interesting to refi any of our investment properties. So be aware of the CPI and PPI numbers. Be aware that they're still way higher than the Federal Reserve would like to see. But also, I think it's important for you to be aware that these numbers are constantly manipulated. So what is really counting, what really makes a difference is that you pay attention to your own receipts when you go shopping and get an impression how far your money is actually getting you and allowing you to go for buying anything. So that's it for today. Be well and stay safe, and I hope to talk to you tomorrow.